Nothing seems out of place, and yet something doesn't feel quite right. The room is the same, your day is unfolding as expected, and there is no clear reason to pause. Still, there is a quiet sense that something is slightly off, though it does not point to anything specific. It does not arrive as a clear thought, and it does not settle into something you can easily understand. Instead, it lingers just beneath your awareness, present in a way that is difficult to fully grasp. You continue moving forward, responding, speaking, and doing what needs to be done, while that subtle unease remains in the background. It does not interrupt you, yet it stays close enough to be felt. When your attention turns toward it, the mind may begin searching for an explanation, moving from one possibility to another. Each explanation can feel close for a moment, though none of them fully match what you are experiencing. The feeling remains slightly out of reach, as if it cannot be fully captured by any single reason. Because of this, it can feel difficult to respond to, as there is nothing concrete to resolve or address. At times it may carry a quiet sense of anticipation, as if something is about to happen, even when nothing does. This sense does not point anywhere specific, yet it keeps your awareness slightly forward, waiting without knowing what it is waiting for. What remains is a form of anxiety that exists without needing to be named, present without becoming fully clear. When you try to find a reason for this feeling, the process itself can begin to feel uncertain. Your mind may move from one possibility to another, searching for something that explains what is already there. Each thought can seem close enough to consider, yet not complete enough to fully settle the feeling. This can create a kind of loop where the search continues without reaching a clear point of resolution. The difficulty is not in thinking, but in the absence of something solid to attach those thoughts to. Without a clear anchor, the feeling remains diffuse, spreading lightly rather than concentrating in one place. Because of this, it can feel less like a reaction to something specific and more like a state that exists on its own. The mind is often used to working with clear causes, where something leads to something else in a way that can be followed. Here, that structure is missing, and the usual way of making sense of an experience does not fully apply. This can make the anxiety feel harder to locate, even though it is clearly present. It is not hidden, and it is not distant, yet it does not take on a form that allows it to be easily understood. As a result, the feeling can remain open-ended, without moving toward a conclusion or a clear explanation. What continues is a sense of unease that exists without needing to be tied to a specific reason, steady enough to be felt, yet undefined enough to remain unresolved. The mind does not stay still when something feels unresolved, even if it cannot identify what is missing. It begins to move, not randomly, but with a quiet intention to find something that will make the feeling clearer. You may notice yourself thinking more than usual, not because there is more to think about, but because something feels incomplete. This creates a subtle pull toward searching, as if there is an answer somewhere that has not yet been reached. The search itself can feel natural, and it may even seem necessary, as though clarity is just one step away. Yet each thought that appears does not fully settle the feeling, and so the process continues. There is often a sense that if you could just find the right explanation, the unease would shift into something more manageable. Because of this, the mind can keep moving forward, following one idea into the next, without fully stopping. What makes this different from other kinds of thinking is that there is no clear endpoint. The process continues not because it is leading somewhere specific, but because it has not yet found something that feels complete. This can create a quiet tension, where the mind remains active, even though nothing concrete is being resolved. Over time, the search itself can become part of the experience, continuing alongside the feeling rather than changing it. The more the mind tries to make sense of this feeling, the more active it can become. Each thought appears with the intention of bringing clarity, yet instead of settling the unease, it can begin to expand it. You may notice that thinking does not bring you closer to a clear understanding, but rather creates more directions to follow. Every possibility opens into another, and the sense of uncertainty can quietly grow within that movement. This does not happen in an obvious or overwhelming way, yet it changes how the feeling is experienced. What began as something subtle can start to feel more present, not because it has deepened on its own, but because it is being held in constant attention. The mind continues to move, trying to organize something that does not easily fit into a clear structure. In doing so, it keeps the feeling active, allowing it to remain at the center of awareness. There can be a sense that more thinking should lead to resolution, though the process itself becomes part of what maintains the unease. This creates a quiet amplification where the experience becomes more noticeable through continued engagement. The feeling is not being intensified by an external change, but by the way it is being approached internally. Over time, the connection between thinking and unease can become more closely linked, making it difficult to separate the two. Trying to stop this kind of thinking can sometimes make it feel more persistent. The moment you notice the unease, there can be a natural impulse to quiet it, to move away from it, or to bring it to an end. This response makes sense, as the mind is often oriented toward resolving what feels unsettled. Yet in this case, the act of trying to stop it can become part of what keeps it going. The attention shifts from the feeling itself to the effort of controlling it, creating another layer of engagement. You may begin to notice whether the feeling is still there, checking if it has lessened or if it has returned. That checking can keep your awareness closely connected to the experience, even when you are trying to move away from it. Instead of fading into the background, the feeling remains present, supported by the attention given to it. There can also be a sense of frustration when it does not respond to control in the way you expect. This can make the experience feel more fixed, as if it is something that resists change. Over time, the effort to stop it and the feeling itself can become closely linked, making it harder to separate one from the other. What was initially a quiet unease can begin to feel more persistent, not because it has grown stronger on its own, but because it is being continuously engaged. After a while, this feeling can begin to take on a sense of continuity, as if it is no longer something that comes and goes, but something that simply remains. It may not feel stronger than before, and it may not change in obvious ways, yet it carries a quiet sense of staying. The unease does not fully step forward, though it does not step back either. Instead, it holds a steady place in your awareness, subtle but consistent. You may notice that even when your attention shifts to other things, the feeling does not completely disappear. It becomes something that lingers at the edges, present even when it is not the focus. Because of this, it can start to feel like a constant background layer, something that continues regardless of what you are doing. The mind can begin to register this as something ongoing rather than something temporary. This does not come from the feeling becoming stronger, but from the way it continues without clear interruption. There is no distinct point where it begins, and no clear moment where it ends. This lack of separation can make the experience feel more continuous, as if it is part of the overall state rather than a passing moment. Over time, the awareness of it can settle into a quiet expectation that it will still be there, even when you are not directly paying attention to it. At some point, the feeling can begin to blend into the background so completely that it no longer feels separate from your usual state. It may not stand out in the way it once did, and instead becomes something that is simply there, without needing to be noticed directly. You might find that you are no longer asking why it is present, not because you have found an answer, but because the question itself has faded. The unease remains, though it feels less like an interruption and more like part of the overall atmosphere of your experience. Because it is no longer being questioned in the same way, it can begin to feel normal, even if it was once unfamiliar. This does not mean it has changed, and it does not mean it has become easier to understand. What has shifted is how it is perceived, moving from something that stands out to something that blends in. The mind can adapt to this kind of presence, treating it as something expected rather than something that needs attention. Over time, this can create the impression that the feeling is always there, even if it is not always noticed. It becomes part of the background tone, something that continues quietly regardless of what else is happening. This sense of normalcy does not come from resolution, but from repeated exposure that makes the feeling less distinct. Attempts to move away from this feeling can sometimes lead back to it in unexpected ways. You may decide to distract yourself, to focus on something else, or to shift your attention completely. For a moment, this can seem to work as your awareness moves towards something more defined. Yet the unease does not fully disappear. and it can return as soon as your attention is no longer occupied. This can create the impression that the feeling is difficult to step out of, even when you are trying to create distance from it. Part of this comes from how the mind relates to what feels unresolved. When something has not been clearly understood, it can continue to draw attention back toward itself, even after you have turned away. This does not happen in a forceful way, yet it is steady enough to be noticed over time. There can also be a subtle resistance in trying to push the feeling aside, as if the effort itself keeps it present. The more you try to move away from it, the more your awareness stays connected to it, even indirectly. This creates a quiet loop, where distance and return become part of the same experience. The feeling is not being held in place by intensity, but by the way attention continues to move toward it even when the intention is to move away. Over time, this kind of anxiety can begin to feel familiar, not because it has been understood, but because it has been present often enough. What was once slightly noticeable can become something that blends more easily into your usual state. You may find that you are no longer surprised by it when it appears, as if it has become part of what you expect to feel. This familiarity does not come from clarity, and it does not mean the feeling has been resolved. It comes from repetition, from the way the experience has continued without clear interruption. Because of this, the unease can begin to feel less like something new and more like something known. Even if you cannot explain it, there can be a quiet recognition when it is there. The mind may no longer search for reasons with the same urgency, not because it has found them, but because the feeling itself is no longer unfamiliar. This shift can make the anxiety feel more stable, even if it remains undefined. It does not move in obvious ways, and it does not change quickly, yet it continues in a steady, recognizable form. In this way, the feeling becomes something that is carried rather than something that stands out. As this feeling becomes more familiar, the way you relate to it can begin to shift without you fully noticing. It may no longer feel like something that needs to be questioned each time it appears. Instead, there can be a quiet sense of recognition, as if you already know what it is, even if you cannot explain it. This recognition can soften the initial reaction, making the feeling less abrupt when it comes into awareness. There is less surprise, and with that, less immediate urgency to understand or resolve it. Because of this, the anxiety can begin to settle into your experience in a more consistent way. It is not that it has become comfortable, but it no longer feels entirely unfamiliar. The mind may begin to allow it to remain, not as a conscious decision, but as a natural response to something that has been encountered many times before. This quiet allowance does not require effort, and it does not depend on finding a reason. It simply reflects a shift from reacting to recognizing. As that shift continues, the feeling can begin to lose some of its sharpness, not because it has changed, but because it is no longer being met with the same level of resistance. What was once something you tried to resolve can start to feel like something you simply notice. When a feeling stays in the background for long enough, it can begin to change how clearly you notice your own internal state. The unease is still there, yet it may no longer stand out in a way that draws your full attention. Instead, it blends into everything else, making it harder to distinguish where the feeling begins and where it ends. This can create a subtle sense of distance, not from the feeling itself, but from your ability to recognize it clearly. You may pause and try to understand what you are experiencing, only to find that it feels less defined than before. It is not that the emotion has disappeared, and it is not that it has become stronger. Rather, it has become less distinct, as if it is no longer separate enough to be easily observed. Because of this, your internal responses can begin to feel more muted, even when something is present. The mind continues to move as usual, yet the clarity of what you are feeling may not feel as immediate. This can lead to moments where you are aware that something is there, though it does not fully come into focus. The experience becomes less about identifying a specific emotion and more about sensing a general state that is difficult to define. There can be moments when it is difficult to tell whether you are feeling okay or not. Nothing feels clearly wrong, yet something does not feel entirely settled either. The experience does not move strongly in one direction, and it does not provide a clear signal to follow. Instead, it exists somewhere in between, where certainty is replaced by a quiet sense of ambiguity. You may try to check in with yourself, asking how you feel, though the answer does not come easily. It is not that there is nothing there, but that what is there does not form into something clearly defined. This can create a sense of being slightly out of sync with your own experience. There is awareness, yet not enough clarity to fully understand what that awareness is pointing to. Because of this, the mind may move between different interpretations without settling on any of them. At times, it may seem like you are fine, and in other moments, it may feel like something is just beneath the surface. Neither state fully takes hold, leaving you somewhere in between both. This in-between state does not demand attention, yet it can feel subtly present, shaping your experience in a way that is difficult to name. As this state continues, there can be a growing sense that your own emotions feel slightly out of reach. You may notice that what you feel is not entirely absent, yet it does not feel as immediate or as clear as it once did. There is awareness, though it carries a certain distance, as if you are observing something rather than fully experiencing it. This distance does not feel dramatic, and it does not interrupt what you are doing. Instead, it exists quietly, making your internal state feel a little less defined. When you try to connect with what you are feeling, there can be a brief pause where nothing fully comes into focus. It is not emptiness, and it is not clarity. It is something in between, where the presence of emotion is sensed, though not fully reached. Because of this, your responses can begin to feel slightly automatic, guided more by what is expected than by what is clearly felt. There can also be moments where you recognize that something is there, though it feels just beyond your immediate awareness. This creates a subtle separation, not between you and your thoughts, but between you and the clarity of your own feelings. The experience becomes less about intensity and more about distance, where emotions exist without fully coming forward. Even within this distance, something small often remains. It does not stand out, and it does not demand attention, yet it is still there in a quiet and steady way. You may notice it in brief moments when your attention softens and turns inward, even for a short time. It can appear as a subtle sense that something is present, though not fully clear. This signal does not try to explain itself, and it does not ask to be followed. It simply reflects that there is still something within you that is aware, even if that awareness feels faint. Because it is not strong, it can be easy to overlook. There is no urgency in it, and nothing about it insists that you pause or respond. Yet it remains consistent in its own way, appearing gently whenever there is space for it. In those moments, it does not bring clarity, but it brings a quiet recognition that something is still there to be noticed. This recognition does not require action, and it does not lead to immediate understanding. It simply exists as a small point of contact, connecting you to what is present, even if it is not fully defined. Nothing about this experience needs to be fully understood for you to remain where you are. The feeling can exist without being explained, and it does not need to take on a clear form to be allowed. It may still be present in the background, though it does not take anything away from what continues to move in your life. You are still able to respond, to connect, and to move through moments in ways that are steady and real. There is space for both, for the quiet presence of unease and for everything else that continues alongside it. This does not require you to change the feeling, and it does not depend on reaching a point where it disappears. Instead, it is a way of allowing what is already there to exist without resistance. In that space, the anxiety does not need to point toward anything, and it does not need to lead to a conclusion. It can remain as it is, without needing to become clearer than it already feels. What begins to settle is not the feeling itself, but the way you are able to stay with it. That steadiness does not come from control, and it does not need to be maintained. It is already present in the way you are able to remain here, with everything as it is.